humped each other for an hour. Brandon didn't exactly strike me as the prude type, after all. Jazz got that fucking goofy grin on his face again. "She's coming to the party," he snickered. And I rolled my fucking eyes, because of course Brandon was coming to the party. Then he tilted his head and pursed his lips. "She told me her cousin was coming, too," he said with a raised eyebrow. I snorted. "She'll probably just spend the whole fucking night hiding in my room." I smirked, shaking my head. My girl wasn't a party person. Jess looked pretty fucking taken aback at my casual talk of having a girl waiting for me in my room at night. And so I had to roll my eyes again, because no one would ever understand. It just wasn't fucking like that. Yes, Bella and I had a great kiss. I wasn't lying when I told her she was better than Stanley. I liked it. Possibly more than I should. Definitely more than I should. It was more important than ever that I keep that fucking flip switched off, because it would be too easy to fuck it up. She had been through more shit in the last year than anyone should ever have to experience. She was delicate. Fragile. In some ways she was very maternal, taking care of me all the time. But in so many other ways my girl was so lost and childlike. I couldn't bear to be that asshole. Tourist wanting to treat my girl the same way assholes like Newton did. And it would be so fucking easy to do it with her warm little body pressed against mine every night. But I was where she felt safe from assholes like that. There's no fucking way I would let her lose that comfort. And I knew that fucking switch was the only thing keeping me from acting like the hormonal teenage moth that I was, and losing it all. And I couldn't lose the routine. I couldn't lose my girl.
Bella's point of view. He did it. Jasper actually talked to Alice. And now I was barricaded in her room listening to her go a million miles a minute, and scrutinizing every last detail of the exchange. The hair Alice sighed dreamily while sitting on the floor against her bedroom door. She had come in, and closed it, and slid back against it, and she hadn't moved for an entire hour. She had a look of victory on her face ever since lunch. It was like she breathed with a wide smile on her face. No. She shook her head, bouncing her black spiky hair all over the place. No words. No words for that hair. She giggled. And I giggled right along with her as I lay on her bed, because I knew exactly how she felt. "Oh," she squealed, clapping her hands together. "And he loved your cookies." She winked, and rubbed her hands together. "They were kind of my secret weapon." She snickered. And I chuckled at her, because they were my secret weapon too. Of course I didn't have black leather pants. She heaved another dreamy sigh, and rested her head back against the door, closing her eyes and still grinning like an idiot. "2 more days," she said with a victorious nod, then lifted her head up and looked at me with a determined expression. "2 more days and Jasper Hale will be mine." She smirked. And I had to giggle at her, because she didn't know it yet, but he already was. I had been mildly concerned all day about Edward's dream the previous night. It was the first time either of us had a dream at all while we were sleeping together. And honestly, it scared me, because if his dreams came back, I would be useless. I could still bring him food and talk to him, and I'd stay awake with him all night, if he'd let me just to keep him company, but I couldn't lose the one thing I had over anyone else. The ability to make him sleep. It was the only hold I had on him at all. So when I packed up his dinner that night, and got ready to leave, I reasoned with myself not to bring it up. I'd lived in the land of denial where Edward was concerned long enough to add one more thing to that list. Edward seemed different tonight, when he came to the door. And I was scared because I was thinking the dream was worse than I thought. But what he said, as he pulled the hood off my head, shocked me.
"Jazz knows everything,"
he muttered, and then took his seat on the bed with a heavy flop, relaying the events of his afternoon to me. I stood stunned, battling with the part of myself that was happy that someone else knew, and the other part that was scared Edward wasn't. I began unloading his meal, glancing at him warily, wondering if this changed anything, and praying it didn't. He didn't seem any more distant than he usually was.
"Don't worry, Jazz will keep his fucking mouth shut. No one will ever know.
Edward shrugged after I got settled on the sofa. I frowned at him. I suppose a part of me was hoping that it would all come out and we wouldn't have to hide anymore. Would it really be the worst thing ever? I grimaced and dropped my head down. Edward sighed heavily and raked his fingers through his hair, staring into the container.
Don't fucking look at me like that, Bella.
He sighed and then looked up to meet my eyes when I lifted my head.
I'm not fucking ashamed of you. I just don't want everybody getting the wrong fucking impression.
He plunged the fork into his mouth and began chewing while staring at me. I don't know what I look like. Maybe a little hurt. Possibly a little skeptical. He rolled his eyes.
Do you have any idea what your cousin would do to me if she found out about this?
He chewed, motioning at the bed he was sitting on. And I cringed. Because the thought of all the screeching Alice would do when she found out I was sleeping next to Edward Cullen every night was horrifying. Edward chuckled.
See?
He asked, eating his food with a smirk.
She'll cut my fucking balls off.
He snickered. And I cringed again, because it was rather likely her real reaction wouldn't be far from it. She would never believe that Edward wasn't somehow taking advantage of me in ways that didn't involve sleep. Not that he ever would. My mind echoed bitterly. I mentally slapped myself for the bitterness. Take what you can get, Bella. I nodded at Edward in understanding. And watched him eat the rest of his meal in silence, plugging the iPod earbuds into my ears while listening to his usual moans and hums. When he was done, he put the containers away and told me how good the meal was, which made me smile. Then he got out his sketchbook and started drawing, so I walked over to the bookcase to select the book I had been reading and relaxed on the sofa. It was silent for a long while, just Edward and I enjoying each other's presence like we always did.
Fuck.
Edward's locus alerted me to the bed.
Here.
He mumbled, reaching over to his bedside table to get something while his sketchbook was still in his lap. He slid something off the table and into his palm.
Before I forget,
he added, turning back towards me. He held his hand out over the mattress and I furrowed my brows, closing my book and getting off the sofa. I walked closer to the bed to inspect the contents of his palm. A key. I raised an eyebrow at him questioningly.
To the room.
He shrugged, holding it out further so I would take it. Slowly, I lifted my hand and plucked the key from his palm, staring at it with a confused expression. Edward was giving me the key to his room. I grinned a little despite myself, and still quirked an eyebrow at him, wondering why I would need it. He rolled his eyes.
I assume Brandon is dragging you to this party on Friday.
He raised his eyebrows. I nodded with a grimace. I already agreed, pre-Jasper committal, and she'd never let me get out of it.
And I assume you don't want to stay down there with all those fucking drunk guys?
I nodded again. I had planned to come up to Edward's room to read and talk to him again. Like the last party. I grinned again despite myself.
Well, I'm locking the room up. I'm going to be hanging with Jess while he's here.
He continued sketching. My grin turned into a frown. You're going to the party? I asked quietly, still standing in front of his bed holding the key. He looked up from his sketch with a cautious expression, and nodded at me once. I bit my lip and looked back down at the key.